Before I tell you what happened that evening, here's a quick preview to draw you in. A quiet hallway, a soft knock, and a boy on the edge of becoming a man. Standing so still I could hear my own heartbeat. What he told me after that pause changed the way I looked at our family and at myself. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. I was rinsing chamomile tea leaves from a ceramic cup when I heard the back door click. Evening light had gone thin and silver, the kind that uses the window like paper and writes shadows across your floor. The clock above the stove ticked a steady metronome, soft but insistent, and the smell of rain from the lilac bushes drifted in. It had been a long day, the kind that frays your patience in little threads. The grocery line, the phone company's hold music, and the pile of mail that never seems to shrink. I'm a woman who has learned to live with ordinary chaos. It's the quiet that unsettles me. I turned, dish towel in hand, and found my grandson standing in the doorway. Daniel, 17, taller than the last time I'd really looked at him, somehow both angular and uncertain, shoulders held in a way that made him appear older and younger at once. He didn't step inside. He stood there, exactly on the seam where linoleum met the old wooden threshold, like a traveler who wasn't sure if he should come in. The porch light behind him lit the edges of his hair in a little crown of gold. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't frowning. He was just quiet. "Hey there, honey," I said, because that's what I always say, even when I don't quite understand what he needs from me. "You're just in time for tea." He nodded, but didn't move. I watched him rub his thumb against his palm, a small, restless gesture that made me think of how he used to worry the edges of his blanket when he was a toddler and the thunder moved across the sky. My mind flicked through a mother's dictionary of possibilities. Trouble at school, trouble with friends, more of that tight silence between him and his father, my son, which has been growing since the divorce. The house knows their disagreements. It carries their echoes the way old wood carries the scent of every season. "Come, sit," I said, gentler now, softer, as though I were coaxing a shy bird to land. I pulled a chair back from the small kitchen table, the one that's seen more pancakes and permission slips than any other piece of furniture I own. I set down a second cup and poured honey into it the way he likes, a flower of sweetness at the bottom. Daniel finally took the step, then another. He sat, hands clasped together, as if he were holding something invisible. I sat opposite, the paint on the table a little worn where we all rest our forearms. I remembered the first time he tried to whistle, lips puckered, eyes crossed in concentration. It's funny what arrives in your head when you're trying not to be afraid. "How's school?" I asked, testing the shallow waters. I didn't want to spook him. He looked at the cup, at the steam, at his own reflection until the steam blurred it. "It's fine," he said, the way teenagers say fine when the truth is complicated. The clock ticked. The trees tapped the window with thin fingers of branch. Somewhere down the block, somebody's dog let out a single bark and then seemed to think better of it. "I'm here," I said. "Whatever it is, I'm on your side, even if you think I won't be." He smiled, but only with one corner of his mouth. "You always say that. I always mean it." He nodded again, breathing in as if to speak, then letting the breath go. The quiet stretched like a bridge that you're not sure will hold. I folded my towel and laid it across my lap, the domestic armor of a woman who has met difficult moments and learned to steady her hands while her heart gallops. When my husband was alive, he used to reach under the table and squeeze my knee when a conversation turned hard, like passing me a secret compass. I could have used that compass then. Grandma, Daniel said finally, voice low. I stood outside for a while before I came in. I didn't know how to start. There's no wrong place to start, I told him. There's only starting. He swallowed, and when he looked up, I saw that same open, earnest expression he wore at 5 when he'd bring me a dandelion and call it a gold flower. There are moments when a child's face is a window into every version of them you've known. I saw all of him at once, and it made my chest ache in that good way love does. I've been trying to do everything right, he said slowly, choosing each word. Like a stone to step on in a creek, helping Mom with my little sister, getting to practice, studying. I thought if I kept moving, the noise would stay behind me. He paused, eyes flicking to the clock. But it catches up. At night, mostly at night. I felt the air shift. I didn't rush in with advice. When people are brave enough to speak, you don't crowd their courage. You make room for it. Last week, he continued, Mr. Hendricks asked me to stay after class. He said he could tell I'm tired. He asked if I wanted to talk. I told him I'm fine. I always say that, but I'm not. And I don't know how to say the other thing without messing everything up. What other thing? I asked softly. His hands tightened together. I could see the tendons move like small cables. I got a job, night shift, just 2 nights a week, stocking shelves at the warehouse market near the highway. They pay me under the table. I didn't tell Dad because he'd be mad. I didn't tell Mom because she'd worry. I wanted to help with the bills. The rent went up again. I figured I could handle it. He took a breath. But I can't. Not like this. I'm falling asleep in first period. I can't think straight during tests. Coach says I'm distracted. He looked at me then, not like a child begging for rescue, but like a person asking for a witness. There is a difference. I felt the weight of his trust settle in my chest, and it was heavy and precious, like holding a newborn again, except this time the baby is the size of a nearly grown man, and he needs you to treat his truth with care. Thank you for telling me, I said. That's brave. He shook his head, a quick, frustrated movement. It doesn't feel brave. It feels like failing. You're not failing, I said. You're trying to hold a house together with your hands. That's not failure. That's love. The kitchen light hummed. A car rolled past, its headlights flipping across the ceiling. I reached for his cup and slid it closer to him. He wrapped his hands around it but didn't drink, as if he needed the warmth more than the taste. There's more, he said. I think I forgot how to breathe right. Like my chest gets tight for no reason. Sometimes during tests. Sometimes at night, laying there. It's like the room is too small for me. I think about everything I'm supposed to be, and I can't find the edges. I'm not asking you to fix it. I didn't want to be alone with it anymore. Those words, the ones that would echo in my heart long after that night, were still gathering, I could tell. He was circling them, working up the courage to land. I didn't push. I thought of all the times I had believed I should be unbreakable, and how kindness from another person, one gentle sentence, had given me permission to be human. I wanted to be that sentence for him. When your grandfather's shop burned down, I said, he pretended he wasn't scared. He wore his strong face and tried to rebuild with it. But at night he'd sit on the edge of the bed and rub his hands together like he could grind worry into dust. One night he told me the truth. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to keep showing up. It didn't fix the shop, but it fixed something in him. he stopped being alone with it. Daniel listened the way you watch the horizon when you're looking for weather. Then he nodded once. He straightened a little in his chair, as if the story had shifted a weight inside him to a place he could carry it better. "Grandma," he said, and this time his voice didn't wobble. It was clear, steady, and it went straight through me. "I can't be brave by myself anymore. I need help. I need you to teach me how to be the kind of man Grandpa was." There it was, the sentence that would live in me. Not a plea for rescue, not a demand, a request for companionship on the road. The words were simple, but they were full of a young man's decision to step into honesty, and that kind of decision changes everything. I felt something loosen in my shoulders, some old fear about what I could and couldn't give. I could give this. I could walk beside him. I stood and moved around the table, not to fix anything, not to make grand promises, but to sit next to my grandson the way a person sits next to another at the beginning of a long journey. We listened to the rain and the clock and our own breathing. The tea cooled. The world outside continued as it always does, dogs, cars, distant conversations, unaware that here, at my kitchen table, a boy had chosen courage and a woman had chosen to match it. "We'll make a plan," I said. "Not tonight. Tonight we'll just name what's true and let it be true. Tomorrow we'll talk about your hours and school and who needs to know. We'll take it one step at a time. But you won't take those steps alone." He let out a breath that sounded like a door unlocking. "Okay." We sat there until the clock's hands met at the top again, and the light in the window turned the color of pewter. I thought about the many ways people say, "I love you," without using the words. A boy shows up at his grandmother's house and stands quietly until he can speak. A grandmother keeps the tea warm, the porch light on, the seat open. Between those small acts, a bridge appears, and if you're lucky, you learn to cross it together. The next morning came quietly, with a pale wash of sunlight slipping through the curtains and settling across the floorboards. I had not slept much, not because of discomfort, but because Daniel's words replayed themselves again and again in my mind. I could still see the way he sat at the kitchen table, hands curled around the warm teacup, his voice steadying itself as he admitted he could not be brave alone. That sentence had taken root inside me. It wasn't something I could put away like folded laundry. It had become part of the air I breathed. When I stepped into the kitchen, he was already there. He hadn't gone home. He must have fallen asleep on the sofa, because the blanket I keep draped over the armrest was pulled around his shoulders. His shoes were lined up neatly by the door, the way his mother taught him. He looked younger then, his long limbs bent awkwardly, his mouth slightly open in the kind of sleep that only comes when exhaustion finally claims you. For a moment, I simply watched him, remembering the boy who once begged for bedtime stories, now on the cusp of adulthood, heavy with burdens no young man should carry alone. I started breakfast as quietly as I could. Eggs, toast, a skillet that hissed as butter melted across its surface. The smell must have woken him because not long after, Daniel shuffled into the kitchen, hair sticking out in every direction, blinking against the light. "You didn't have to cook," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "I didn't have to," I said, sliding eggs onto a plate, "but I wanted to. Besides, you'll think straighter on a full stomach. Sit down." He obeyed, rubbing his eyes and then looking at me with a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. It struck me how rarely teenagers are offered the chance to just be cared for, without judgment or expectation. The world so often rushes them into proving themselves before they even know who they are. Over breakfast, he was quieter than usual, but I noticed his shoulders weren't quite as tight as the night before. The silence between us felt less like a wall and more like a shared blanket. When he finally spoke, his words were careful but deliberate. "I meant what I said last night, about needing help." "I know you did," I answered, "and I meant what I said too. We'll figure this out together." He hesitated, then asked, "Do you think Dad will understand? Or will he just see it as another thing I've done wrong?" That question was heavier than the skillet I had lifted earlier. My son, his father, was a good man at heart, but the divorce had carved a sharp edge into him. He carried his disappointments like stones in his pockets, and sometimes he dropped them into Daniel's hands without meaning to. I thought carefully before replying. "Your father loves you," I said slowly. "But love doesn't always know the right words. Sometimes it comes out sounding like criticism because that's the only language Payne has learned." Daniel chewed his toast thoughtfully, brow furrowed. "I don't want to disappoint him, but I'm already so tired of pretending I've got it all together." I reached across the table and laid my hand on his. "Disappointment doesn't come from honesty, Daniel. It comes from silence. You're not weak for speaking. You're strong for letting someone in." For the first time, he allowed himself a small, genuine smile. It was fleeting, but it was real. That smile told me he had started to believe he wasn't facing this storm alone anymore. Later that day, we went for a walk. The sky was patched with drifting clouds, and the air smelled faintly of cut grass and rain-soaked earth. We walked side by side, not saying much at first, just listening to the rhythm of our steps. Eventually, Daniel began to talk, not in rushed confessions, but in pieces, like laying out puzzle parts. He told me about the warehouse job, how he'd drag his feet through long aisles of stacked boxes, muscles aching, mind drifting toward unfinished assignments waiting for him at home. He spoke of how, during the quietest hours of the night, he felt swallowed by a pressure he couldn't name, as if the walls of the world were pressing in. "I don't even know if it's something real," he said, "or if it's just me being weak." I stopped him right there on the sidewalk, turned so he had to look at me. "Listen to me, Daniel. Struggle doesn't mean weakness. It means you're human. Every one of us. Your dad, your mom, even your grandfather when he was alive. We've all stood in that space where we didn't know how to carry the weight. You don't have to carry yours alone." His eyes glistened, and he blinked quickly, pretending it was just the wind. It's hard to believe that sometimes. "I know," I said. "That's why you borrow someone else's belief until your own comes back. Borrow mine." That evening, back at the house, Daniel sat at the piano in the living room. He hadn't touched it in months. The first notes came hesitant, uncertain, but soon his hands found the memory of old melodies. I sat nearby, knitting needles still in my lap, listening to the room fill with sound that felt like both sorrow and hope woven together. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And sometimes honesty is the most beautiful music of all. When he finished, he looked at me and whispered, "I feel lighter." I nodded, "Because you've stopped hiding." He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that seemed steadier than it had the night before. The words he had spoken, the ones that had shaken me, were still echoing in the room, but now they carried less weight. They had been shared, they had been honored, and that made all the difference. That night, after he had gone to bed, I sat alone for a while, watching the moon through the window. I thought about the generations before me, about the struggles they had carried silently, about how many unspoken truths had withered inside them. I whispered a quiet promise to myself and to Daniel. This cycle would be different. He had found his voice, and I would make sure it was never silenced again. The house settled around me, creaking like an old friend stretching its bones. I knew the road ahead would not be simple. There would be more hard conversations, more nights of worry, more steps that felt uncertain. but for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. Hope born not from fixing everything at once, but from knowing we had begun. And beginnings, however small, have a power all their own. The following week unfolded with a kind of fragile rhythm. Daniel stayed at my house more often than not, sometimes bringing his school books, sometimes just his quiet presence. I let him be. At his age, a boy doesn't always need constant questions. Sometimes he just needs a safe place where the air doesn't press down on him. Still, I could sense a shift. He carried himself differently, as though speaking his truth that first night had unlocked a door inside him, and now he was cautiously stepping into a new room where he wasn't alone. One evening after dinner, I suggested we visit the community garden 2 streets over. It was a place his grandfather loved, a patch of earth we had both tended for years. The rows of tomatoes and beans, the worn benches beneath creaking oak trees, it was as much a sanctuary as it was a garden. Daniel hesitated at first, but agreed. We walked there just as the sky began to blush with dusk, the air heavy with the smell of damp soil and mint leaves brushed by the wind. When we arrived, he stopped and looked around as though seeing it for the first time. "I forgot how quiet it is here," he said. His voice carried both relief and something softer, something like remembering who we used to be. "You used to dig holes bigger than the plants," I teased gently. "Your grandfather would laugh and say we'd need a ladder just to reach the tomatoes." That earned me a small laugh, the kind that escaped before he could hide it. He bent down and brushed his hand across the dirt, the gesture almost reverent. For a while we worked in silence, pulling weeds, straightening stakes, watering the plants. There is a healing that comes from dirt under your nails, from the rhythm of tending to something that depends on your care. As twilight deepened, Daniel finally spoke. "Grandma, can I tell you something without you thinking less of me?" I set down the watering can and faced him. "Daniel, there's nothing you could say that would make me love you less." He nodded, eyes lowered. "Sometimes I feel like I'm invisible. At school, at home. Everyone talks about what I should do or who I should be, but no one sees me for who I really am. I try to keep up, to be what they expect, but it's exhausting. And then at night, I lie awake thinking about everything I didn't say, everything I didn't do, and it feels like I'm disappearing." The words were raw, trembling with a kind of honesty most adults struggle to reach. My heart clenched, not because he was wrong, but because I knew too well what it felt like to be unseen. I crouched down beside him so our eyes met. "You are not invisible, Daniel. You are here, and I see you. Not the grades, not the chores, not the football games, just you. The boy who used to bring me wildflowers, the young man brave enough to tell me the truth about his struggles. That's who I see. And that's enough." His jaw tightened, and I saw his eyes glisten in the fading light. He swallowed hard, and for a moment I thought he might turn away. But instead he leaned forward and wrapped his arms around me. It wasn't the quick, awkward hug of a teenager. It was fierce, almost desperate, as if he were anchoring himself to something solid. "I needed to hear that," he whispered. We stayed like that until the first stars pricked the sky. It was one of those rare embraces where time stops, and the weight of unspoken fears lifts just enough to let hope breathe. On the walk home, Daniel spoke more freely. He told me about the pressure he felt from his teachers, how he worried about college when he could barely keep up with high school. He admitted he sometimes envied his friends whose families seemed steadier, even though he knew every family carried its own shadows. His honesty was steady now, not rushed or forced, and I listened with the patience of someone who understood that being heard can sometimes heal more than being answered. When we reached the house, he turned to me. "Grandma, Do you think Grandpa would be proud of me? Even with all this mess? I touched his shoulder, looking into the same eyes I had once watched light up over birthday cakes and Christmas mornings. He wouldn't just be proud, Daniel. He'd be honored. Because pride comes from achievement, but honor comes from courage. And you've shown more courage in the last week than many people show in a lifetime. His shoulders eased, and he exhaled a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. That night, as he settled on the sofa with a blanket pulled to his chin, I felt a quiet certainty rise in me. This boy, this young man, was finding his way step by step. And though the path ahead would still be uneven, he had finally discovered that he didn't have to walk it alone. I sat in my chair nearby, knitting needles in hand, and glanced over at him as his eyelids drooped. He looked peaceful. The kind of peace that comes not from everything being solved, but from knowing you're no longer carrying the burden in silence. And in that small, ordinary living room, beneath the hum of the old lamp and the ticking of the clock, I realized we had both been given a gift. Not just his words, the ones I'd never forget, but the trust behind them. The kind of trust that binds two generations together, stitching the gaps between fear and love, between silence and truth. And I promised myself, as I watched him drift to sleep, that I would guard that trust with everything I had. The days turned into weeks, and slowly a new pattern settled into our lives. Daniel still had his struggles. No story like this changes overnight, but the heaviness that once clung to him seemed to ease. He spoke more often, laughed more freely, and carried himself with a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. It was as if he had finally found a safe harbor after drifting too long in restless waters. One Saturday afternoon, we sat together on the porch, the late summer sun laying its warmth across the wooden planks. A gentle breeze stirred the wind chimes, their soft notes weaving through the sound of cicadas. Daniel leaned against the railing, his arms crossed loosely, and for the first time in a while, his expression was light. "Grandma," he said, almost shyly, "do you ever think about the future? Like what it's supposed to look like?" "All the time," I replied with a chuckle. "And the older I get, the more I realize it rarely turns out the way we imagine. But that doesn't mean it can't turn out beautifully." He nodded, looking thoughtful. I used to think the future was this huge mountain I had to climb all at once. Every grade, every game, every decision, it all felt like it decided everything. But lately it feels more like steps. Small steps I can take without losing myself. I smiled, proud of the wisdom he was uncovering for himself. That's exactly it. Life isn't about rushing to the peak. It's about steady steps, learning where to place your foot, and knowing that if you stumble, you can always get back up. He was quiet for a moment, then turned to me. "I don't think I could have seen it that way without you. If I hadn't told you that night, I don't know where I'd be now." His words filled my chest with a warmth that was almost too much to contain. "You gave me a gift that night too, Daniel. You trusted me. And trust is one of the rarest treasures we can give each other." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun dip lower. The world seemed both vast and intimate at the same time, the kind of moment you wish you could bottle. Later that evening, Daniel asked if he could cook dinner. I watched him move around the kitchen with a confidence that surprised me, chopping onions, stirring sauce, humming under his breath. It was simple spaghetti and garlic bread, but he served it with a kind of pride that made the meal taste richer than any feast. As we ate, he looked across the table and said, "Grandma, I think I'm going to talk to Dad. Not to fight, just to be honest. I want him to know what's been going on with me, and I want him to know I'm trying." The courage in his voice nearly brought me to tears. "That's a brave decision," I told him, and I'll be right here when you need me. A few days later, I got a call from my son. His voice was thick with emotion. "Mom," he said, "Daniel told me everything." I didn't realize how much he was carrying. We talked, really talked. Thank you for being there when I wasn't. When I hung up the phone, I felt a deep peace settle over me. This wasn't the end of the journey. It was the beginning of healing, the slow mending of strained bonds. But it was a beginning built on truth, and that made all the difference. That night, as Daniel sat once more at the piano, his fingers moving with new confidence, I listened with my eyes closed. The melody was no longer hesitant. It was full, clear, alive. It wasn't just music. It was a declaration, a promise to himself that he could face the future not by pretending to be brave, but by sharing his heart with those who loved him. And as I sat there, letting the music wash over me, I realized the words he spoke that first night. I can't be brave by myself anymore. Were no longer just his confession. They had become our truth. Because none of us, not at 17 or at 60, are meant to carry life alone. In that moment, with the house glowing warmly around us and the sound of his music filling the air, I knew I would never forget the journey we had walked together. My grandson had stood quietly once, carrying unspoken weight. But now he stood taller, his words steady, his heart open. And those words, the ones I'll never forget, had not only changed him, they had changed me too.